Introduction of Jim Gardner, who needs no introduction. I just want to say that when Gunnar Back anchored the news on Channel 6 in the 50s and 60s, there were 3 news stations, 3, 6, and 10. And Gunnar Back came in regularly number 4, behind the cartoons on Channel 48. That's how it was in the old days. One year in the 80s, when Jim was anchoring the news, the ratings at 6 o'clock in Philadelphia were so high that they had more viewers at 6 o'clock in Philadelphia than any other station in the country. Now that's more than anybody in New York. In other words, more people watch Jim at 6 o'clock than watch Chuck Scarborough at WNBC New York in the same rating period. That's how big Channel 6 and Action News became. And Jim and I owe a lot to Larry Kane, because when he went to New York, Jim moved up, and I came to town and took over Jim's job, and it's been a great 30, 40 years. What, 76 you came, right? I came 70. Jim Gardner, ladies and gentlemen.
Every year, Mark keeps getting younger and younger, and I keep getting older and older. I'm 1 year younger than Channel 6, I believe. Is this 70? Well, there you go. Thank you, everybody. It is great to be here. I think before I say thank you formally, we should take a moment to acknowledge some excellent reporting, the best, frankly, that we can offer our viewers. All of the stations in Philadelphia sent crews into the hurricane zone this past weekend. And self-disclosure, I was in Denver visiting my daughter, so I didn't get to see all of the reporting that was going on over the weekend, but I did get to see a good deal of it on Facebook and Twitter. But I think in the spirit of nonpartisanship, I would like to acknowledge the reporters and photographers who went to Florida this past weekend. That would include Greg Argos, James Ward, and Will Kenworthy from Channel 3, Tim Furlong, Samantha Dunn, and Augie Conti from Channel 10, Chris O'Connell and Dave Eitzen from Channel 29, and of course Brian Taff and Jason Maracini from Channel 6. I don't have the rosters of photographers and reporters who went to Harvey, except of course from Channel 6, Chad Pradelli and Rich Lacavera. If I had gone through all the personnel who had gone to Harvey, executive producer Rick Williams would have come up here and turned my mic off, because he is constantly keeping me within a certain period of time. And that has been a battle between us for how many years? 35 years. There you go. All right. It is no surprise that when the story becomes compelling, and the challenges of telling the story become more difficult, good reporters and good news photographers dig down as deep as they have to go to meet those challenges. And that's what these people did over the last week, and I just think they deserve our acknowledgement and our appreciation. Needless to say, we at Channel 6, and I've just had the incredible experience of seeing some Channel 6 people whom I haven't seen for 37, 38 years, or 35 years, like Cheryl Cotton, who used to be our graphic artist when I first got to Channel 6, and Joe Pellegrino, who was our great sportscaster when I first got to Channel 6. And, you know, I was this cub reporter who had no standing, and look up to these people with this shock and awe. And of course, Mike Strug as well. It's incredible to see these folks today. But we at Channel 6 are grateful for the broadcast pioneers acknowledging this anniversary of ours. It is a chance for those of us at Channel 6 to step back a little bit, to remember our heritage, to think of the responsibilities that we have toward our viewers today. It is something that we always want to be mindful of, but you have given us, hey Steve, you have given us a good opportunity to do that here today. From a personal point of view, it has been an extraordinary situation. I've been incredibly lucky to be able to work at the same television station for 41 years, to work with incredibly talented people in this business, from reporters and writers and editors and photographers, artists, managers. They have all made me better. That started the first day I got to this television station, and I think that's the way it's supposed to be. In a good operation, we're all supposed to make each other better, both purposefully and incidentally. People often ask me, to what do I attribute Action News' success over the years? And to be absolutely honest with you, I don't know. The fact is that we all the television stations in town do good reporting. All the television stations in town have high-quality people led by well-intentioned and excellent and experienced managers. So I'm not trying to say that we are unique in this, but it is my personal experience about where I work that we all seem to understand that the sum is greater, or I should say, the whole should be and is greater than the sum of the parts. I am quite sure that when new people come into our building for their first day of work, their first couple of days of work, they understand very quickly, they get the message very quickly, that to be overly focused on their individual successes and prerogatives will not make them many friends at our television station. I sometimes think of Action News as the San Antonio Spurs of television news. We are not particularly flashy. We emphasize the excellence of the team as opposed to emphasizing the excellence or success of any specific individual. Two things. This is obviously a dynamic time in our business. We have people at all of our television stations working hard to learn more about the changing wants and habits of the audience. This changing landscape, combined with all the new technology at our disposal, creates dazzling opportunities for us, but in addition to that, some serious and difficult challenges. What has not changed and what must never change is an age-old responsibility, and that is for those of us who report the news, who write the news. We've got to be fair. Without a commitment to fairness, to accuracy, to making intelligent and rational and empathic choices, all of the bells and whistles and all of what we can do today that we couldn't do even a year ago doesn't make much of a difference. Finally, we are part of a profession that is being criticized and demeaned from very high places like it never has before. It should be obvious to us, it need be obvious to us, that some of that is resonating for a significant portion of the audience, more in some portions of the country than others, but I doubt that there is anybody who works in a newsroom anywhere who isn't aware of it and who isn't thinking about it, at least on a reasonably consistent basis. It seems to me the worst thing we can do is to respond defensively or offensively or stridently or dismissively. What we should do is just do our jobs with complete commitment to accuracy, to our best judgment, and again, to our unfailing sense of fairness. No political tactic, no political strategy that seeks to make us a target to whatever ends should prompt us to produce anything but our best work and the kind of work that this city has produced for many, many years. Thank you for inviting us here. Thank you for acknowledging Channel 6. And we're going to continue to do the best job we possibly can. Thank you.
In 1996, Jim was Person of the Year at the Pioneers, and of course he's a member of the Hall of Fame, and a truly wonderful representative of Channel 6 for so long. It's hard to believe. In fact, one rating period I think in the early 90s, the ABC network news was #1 in America. It beat NBC at 6:30. And Channel 6 contributed such a large chunk of that audience, that Peter Jennings sent, I think, a bottle of champagne to Jim Gardner for his help in making those ratings what they were. Well, anyway, we move on. I have in my hand a note that was emailed from Bob Kravitz, who was a photographer for decades at Channel 6. And these are challenging times. Bob is in the hospital having suffered recently a stroke and a blood disorder, but I can tell you, I spoke with him yesterday and he's doing well and hopes to be home soon, but he sent along some thoughts. Yes. He's the chief photographer and a member of the board, by the way, of the Pioneers. But he sent a few notes he'd like me to read on his behalf. I can tell you that Action News started with 19 people in the whole newsroom. When I came to Channel 6 in 1967, Joe Phipps was smoking on the air, Al McDowell kept losing his toupee, Larry Kane was the youngest anchor, and Jim Gardner became a local legend. Everybody was on the day shift then when he came here because there was no 11 o'clock news then. You came to work at 8 or 9 in the morning. There was a meeting of staff, including photographers. They gave out assignments, and we used film, of course. When you went out of town, your schedule for shooting depended entirely on the time schedules of the buses or the airlines that were going to get your film back. That's not today. Bob writes that no cable shooting the stories in real times as he sees in the flooding stories and the hurricane stories really have changed, and he really appreciates watching it. I still get my tech news from a TV audio magazine, and what's coming for the new photographers in the future will boggle your mind. That phrase, he says, was stolen from a dear departed friend, Irv Homer. My heart is still Action News. They were my family for 35 years. They nurtured me and fed me my life's work. The thoughts of Bobby Kravitz, who couldn't be here with us today, but will be here, I'm sure, the next time at our next luncheon. If I were religious, as many of the people you see in the hurricane stories, I would say I thank God that I came to Philadelphia in 1977, because coming here, I worked for 25 years at Channel 6. I met my wife, who was a producer at Channel 6, and I've had a very good life in Philadelphia. But I'm not religious, so instead of thanking God, I thank Bob Feldman, because Bob Feldman... Don't get swell-headed here now. But Bob Feldman was the assistant news director at the station in Hartford where I worked. And in '77, he called me and said, "Would you like to come to Philadelphia?" And I said, very clever of me, "Why not?" I did, and it's been a great life. And here is Bob Feldman.
I was lucky to be at Channel 6 twice. I was there. That's why we need engineers. And I was there twice. First under Triangle from '66 to '68. And my first day in the office, I was a producer, and I sat across the desk pod from another fellow who had a first day in the office named Larry Kane. He was in radio, I was in television. That's how small the newsroom was. And we ended up, besides being a friend, we actually ended up putting Larry Kane on the air on television at night with a 1-minute segment, which I named Late and Local, which I guess is the predecessor to Breaking News. He did a minute's worth of police blotter, fire, traffic, and he did it without notes because he had just come off a radio shift and he knew everything that was going on in town. At that time, there were about 20 people in the newsroom, and people like Mike Strug was there, who I had lunch with today, and Harry Thomas, who was at that time, I think, in the lab when I first showed up. That's a film lab, for those of you who have never heard of film. But it was a good time, but it was a learning time. I went away until 1976, and I returned with Cap Cities, along with Alan Nesbitt as news director, and Larry Pollack, who was the general manager. At that time, I think we had about 42 or 44 people in the newsroom. I left 12 years later, and there were 125 people on the staff in the news department. We had bureaus at the end in Harrisburg, Trenton, Atlantic City, and Wilmington, all connected by copper line. Video circuits, because we didn't have microwaves at that time. At the end, we ended up putting microwaves in from all of those bureaus. The product that was produced in the beginning to the product that's produced today has not changed that much. It's solid reporting, excellent writing, but very clear, community-oriented thinking about news. And that's what has made Action News such a strong entity in this town. It's home to viewers, no matter what their ages are, especially the people that were there at the beginning who watched us all these years. But even the young people feel like this is their home station. And the kind of people that were there then are still there today. Even the new people have that same Action News spirit. Thanks a lot.
Jerry, I'm getting a lot of exercise walking back and forth here. This is a good arrangement you have. How does this work for people who are only 5'10"? Yeah. It's nothing. It's nothing. The success of Channel 6. Oh, this works? Yeah. The success of Channel 6, I think, if we want to be fair, goes back to several people take credit for it, but when Action News was formed in 1970, everybody until that time did 22 minutes of news in a half hour at 6 o'clock, and they averaged a dozen stories, a dozen news items. Action News was a brainstorm that a lot of people take credit for. I'm not sure who really deserves the credit, but anyway, Action News said, no, we'll do 30 stories, and this will have two effects. One, you'll never get bored watching the news because the stories keep changing. And also, we'll go to places where people are gathered and we'll show what they're doing. For example, we'll go to a church picnic and there'll be 200 people there. And we'll put it on the news for 20 seconds. But those 200 people will each call 10 friends and say, hey, I might be on Action News tonight. Now you add that hundreds and hundreds of people every day calling their friends to say, I might be on the news tonight. And in the course of a couple of years, you've got tens of thousands of new viewers. Anyway, it worked. One of the people who was on the air before and is now was on the air after, but it left in, what year, Joe? You left there in 70, pardon?
I arrived in 71.
And you left, oh, you were?
In 76.
Oh, I thought you were there before Oh, okay. Okay, then I'll introduce Mike Strug next, because Mike Strug was there before and then was there with Action News, and you can give us some insights into the change. Mike Strug, who, by the way, worked at channels 3, 6, and 10. He worked at channels 3, 6, and 10, which gives him a distinct place in Philadelphia news. And he's bringing up a plastic bag? Oh, okay. Oh, it's a secret. Yeah.
I don't know how it happened that suddenly I became among the oldest people in the room. Wherever it was, I go to a restaurant, I'm the oldest guy in the room. Anyway, yeah, I started in 1966, but interestingly, back then Triangle owned AM, FM, TV. I was actually hired for radio, as was Larry Kane, as somebody else pointed out. There were a number of us who were hired. Lou Pappas was hired at the same time. And it was part of the pop explosion. If you remember, when I was a kid here in Philadelphia, Wibbage, WIBG, was the rock station. Now we get to 1966, and WFIL-AM decides they're going to compete with them, and they did it very well with guys like George Michael and Jay Cook and Long John Wade, and brought all these guys in. And while we were hired for radio, as Mark suggested, or as Bob suggested, they put Larry on TV doing something. Then they called me, I was the Wilmington bureau chief. I was the bureau. There was no, and Lou Pappas was the Camden bureau chief. And so we had bureaus that were one man. In any event, it was owned by Triangle, and you worked for all three stations. I remember I started work in September. By the way, it's almost exactly 51 years since all of us started back there in 1966, because it was September. Bob, you're suggesting you sat across from Larry. It was in September of 1966, and it seems like yesterday. We were owned by Triangle Publications. At some point, Mark, you mentioned that they were number 4. I remember specifically we were number 4 behind Wee Willie Weber and his cartoons. That was the show that was on. And the other guy mentioned, Dick Kellman. I don't know if you remember, Dick Kellman we were all hired at the same time. And we were kids. We were learning. We were all in our 20s. Until then, I really do feel that television news was radio with pictures. And what I think Channel 6 did was marry that, and so we started writing to the video. My goodness, what a concept. You say, look at the car going down the street, and the editor cut the car going down the street. Specifically, I can remember photographers saying, hey, I just shot this, make sure you include it in the copy. Or I might see something and say to the photographer, hey, shoot that, and I'll put it in the copy. And it became our style. It was the way we did things. We were learning at the same time. I tell this story. Mel Campman was the news director when Action News started. And again, nobody, was it George Kohler? Was it Mel Campman? Somebody came up with this Action News concept. At the show, and this is unheard of following this, but back then, we would all go into the news director's office and watch the show. And we would look at what the other guy had done, what the other woman had done, and we would learn from each other and criticize each other, and it made us better. We began to learn how to do what we were doing, and it was creating tickies, which were those 15 or 20-second little video pieces that told the story. Somebody realized, hey, pictures tell the story. You don't have to speak for 45 seconds. Just show that building collapse or whatever it is. Specifically, they hired a fellow by the name of Eric Goldenberg. I don't know if you remember Eric. Eric was hired as a photographer. He was given one of those wind-up Bell & Howell cameras, and he had to go out into the suburbs every day and come back with 3 stories. The church bazaar that you mentioned, a backyard festival of some sort, and they ran every time. If a producer needed time, he couldn't kill one of those tickies. He could cut a reporter short or cut sports short, but he couldn't cut those because, as you suggest, if there were 100 people there, they all called their family and friends and said, we're going to be on, we think we're going to be on. When they were on, they became viewers. If they weren't on, they were upset. I learned that because when I went to work at the other stations, they did allow those stories to be cut. Producer could cut that backyard bazaar. Well, now you had 100 people who were pissed at you because they expected to be on, and they called all their family and friends. So Channel 6, I was thinking about it on the drive over here. Channel 6 essentially became the news equivalent of soft pretzels in Philadelphia. They are the standard. There seems to be no question about that. Let's see. I'll end with the story. I anchored originally the noon show in the, I guess, early 70s with Diana Robinson, who then went on to Detroit very successfully. I then did the 11 o'clock show until somebody said, maybe not. Ron Tendelia said, never mind, go back to reporting. But I almost got to do the weather. And the story is Mel Campman liked my work, and at some point said, hey, why don't you try doing the weather? Do it on Sunday night. And I think John Hambleton was our meteorologist at the point. By the way, now there are 5 or 6 meteorologists. Joe and I were talking about when we anchored weekends, we would argue, hey, you do the weather this weekend. And we would, check the teletype, and that's how we did the weather. In any event, Campman says, hey, try doing the weather. And so I did it for 3 Sunday nights. And then that following week, I ran into my father. I said, hey, Dad, did you see me doing the weather? And he said, yeah. I was my father. Mel said essentially the same thing. And let me conclude by saying, the other thing, we were kids. We were young. We were in our 20s. I was 23 coming up on 24 when we got hired in 1966. And we just enjoyed what we were doing. We were having fun. So much fun that, how about this for a souvenir? The Action News. We used to play softball and touch football. Okay, you got that? In any event, so I went on to work at and we could have a lengthy discussion on why I didn't continue working at Channel 6, but I went on. You can only take me for so long, and that time is running out. But in any event, I spent 12 years there, 10 at Channel 3, 20 years at Channel 10. I still feel a very close feeling for what it was like back at Channel 6. Mark, you're up. But thank you all.
I remember when I first came to town in '77 to be interviewed for a job, and I went to lunch with Bob Feldman and Larry Pollock. Larry was the manager of the station at the time, and he was explaining the profit-sharing program to me, and he said, and in 10 years, you'll be 100% vested in the profit-sharing program. I said, 10 years? I'm thinking to myself, who works at a TV station for 10 years? I lasted 25. In the mid-'80s, Channel 6 had a crisis that we've all forgotten about, but it was bad at the time. Channel 6, Capital Cities Broadcasting, bought ABC, the network and all the stations. And because Channel 6, Philadelphia, and Channel 7, New York, overlap in New Jersey, you couldn't have both licenses because that was competing 2 stations in one market. There were only 2 reasons that the station didn't lose its license and have to sell Philadelphia. And the 2 reasons were CBS had already done it with WCAU and WCBS New York, and also the minority communities, organizations in Philadelphia all wrote letters to the FCC saying what a great job the station did and how we should continue to keep a license and be here because we were so important to the community. And the FCC gave permission, and of course we were not sold away, which many of us were concerned at the time we would be. But that's ancient history. One of the people who was involved in keeping the minority community working in Philadelphia and doing such a good job is with us today, Diego Castellanos, who still hosts Puerto Rican program on Channel 6. And am I correct that you started in 65?
70.
In 70. So
47 years.
47 years.
47 years today is the today. My first show aired on September 13th, 1970. The station lied to me. They said it would be for 13 weeks. It would be for 3 months. I don't know why they said that, because I'm still there. And the people who told me that are not there. I was hired by a man by the name of Jim McCurdy. I don't know how many of you remember him. He was the general. Told me that it would be for 10 weeks. And I saw Gene here at one of these events for Broadcast Pioneers 2 years ago. And it was during the Broadcast Pioneers banquet. And he told the people at his table, pointing at me, saying, he is one of my success stories. I almost cried, because the next time that I came to the banquet, I looked around for Gene, and they told me, if you see him, run, because he died. So it's been a couple months maybe after Puerto Rican Panorama began, Channel 10 started a similar show at the same time. So you know that it was intended to compete with me. They hired a very cute Cuban hostess who had connections with movies and television and whatever. So every week she would have some VIP, some artistic figure on the show. Here I was interviewing community people, and about 10 weeks later or so, Channel 10 discontinued their show. So that left me all alone at that time, dealing with issues that affect the Hispanic community. I just want to tell you just a couple of things more. That Gene McCurdy told his table that I was one of his success stories. I came around the following year, and he was gone. And I want to tell you one last thing about my current general manager, Bernie Prasenica. I asked him when he first came aboard as general manager if he thought that Puerto Rican Panorama would end soon. And his answer was, no, that wasn't his answer. His answer was, not on my watch. So I thank Bernie, and I thank those of you in Broadcast Pioneers. And I just wanted to tell you that one more story, quick story. At one of these banquets, some guy walked up to me, some guy that I didn't know, walked up to me and said, I watch your show, I never miss it. I watch it every week. And his wife, who was there, said, well, that's because I make him watch it. I force him to watch it. And so he said, no, in the beginning, she forced me, but then I got used to watching it. I kind of enjoyed, what you do. And so now I watch it because I want to. I asked somebody from Channel 6 who was there, I said, who's that guy? And he said, Howard Jones. I said, who's Howard Jones? He said, Happy the Clown. I thank you very much for today, and Mark.
Muchas gracias. Next time you're in Florida, by the way, you got to correct those people. They keep calling Isla Morada Isla Morada. I don't know when they changed that. It's one of the keys. One of the producers who overlapped the old Channel 6 News and Action News is Mike Nozillo, who was there in the late 60s and early 70s, and he's here to say something today. Mike? I think you worked from 67 to 72. Is that right?
Yeah. Thank you. Lou Klein is the man who brought me here to Philadelphia. I had met Lou Klein on the telephone line coordinating Milwaukee Braves baseball and Byron Som and Gene Kelly, and Lou was the master control director. So that was the first time I talked with Lou Klein. Eventually, 10 years in Milwaukee and doing the Packer games with CBS, I was an associate producer. I went to Evansville, Indiana. I was a program manager and operations director, and made a connection with Lou at the National Association of Television Program Executives, which had just been formed. And my good friend Mort Roseman introduced me to Lou, and I said, Lou, we talked on the phone, yak yak. He said, well, what have you been doing? So I gave him my background as a producer, director, and head of public affairs programming in Milwaukee, and program manager and operations director. He said, if you're ever looking for a job, he said, give me a call. He says, you have a lot of experience. Okay. Knock on wood. About 6 months later, I said, Lou, I'm free and ready to come and see you. He said, come on in. And in 5 minutes, he gave me a job. So I came in to do The World Around Us with Anita Cleaver in 1967. Action News was not Action News then. It was just a news program. I told Lou the first week I was at the apartments where they put you up until you find the housing. And I said, Lou, I fell asleep at your news. I said, in Milwaukee, we had a fast film opening, fast music, went right into, and we segmentized. We had national news, local news, national news, personalities, weather, sports, and we had a brand new studio in Milwaukee. It was because we were part of the Hearst Corporation. And I said, your news is really a sleeper. I said, your background, I did 10 years ago in Milwaukee. He said, I know, Mike, I know. We're trying to we're working on something with a fellow by the name of Jack Steck, who was a marvelous, marvelous man. Maybe you old-timers remember Jack Steck and Florence, his wife. Great entertainers and great people to work with. That being said, they eventually started getting this format together, and he said, Mike, you want to direct this new show? I think we're going to call it Action News or something. I said, Lou, I did enough news programs directing in Milwaukee, trying to beat the deadlines. We had a very small staff. I'm trying to, as I go on the air, I'm read the film lead-in so I can time my roll to get the film up in time. I said, no, I had enough of news. Well, Bob Terry took it over, and Bob was a great friend, and he was one heck of a guy, and we miss him today, I'll tell you. Anyway, so The World Around Us with Anita Cleaver, who won Emmys in Chicago as the Blue Fairy or something like that, was supposed to be, we were to fight Captain Kangaroo. And I said, oh, Lord, pray for us. It was a show for children and adults. So we had segments with Anita working with kids, and then we filled it in with kids. And this is fun. It was a big show. And Howie Kesselman was the associate producer. I was the director and produced in it. And it was a marvelous show to do, but it began to lose steam in the second year in ratings. So Lou moved me out into other things. I did one show with Carter Merbrier, Captain Noah, which is in the picture of me with Pat, and then when he had his third station in syndication. So I said, this is a great format. This is a great show. He said, would you like to direct it? I said, yeah, sure. I mean, I did a couple of shows. Lou Klein wouldn't let me do it. So he was fending off Captain Noah, and Lou will tell you the story. He was, for every day in the week, Carter Merbrier was in Lou's office saying, you got to put our show on the air, fighting the world around us. Anyway, it eventually happened, and Carter did great things with the show, and Pat. From the world around us, then I did, oh boy, I left all my notes at home, but we'll do it from the top of my head. They came to me and they said, we want to, Tom, what's his name on Channel 10? Okay, he said, yeah, Snyder. Well, we tried that with Connie Roos, and the show was called Target, and we did pretty well with it in the beginning, and then we had some good guests. And then Jerry Blavitt needed help, so we put Jerry's place on in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the news department was building up and gaining a lot of steam. And Steve Sachs was a gem because anything he ever asked Steve to do, he did it well, he did it fast, and he did it quickly. And all the old crew, which are no longer even alive, I guess, are gone. And I did so many other shows. It's too many to remember at the moment. So Jerry just gave me the wrap-up sign. So I'll say au revoir. I have some pictures from some of the old shows. I can show any of you them. And thank you for having me. It was a great time.
Thank you very much. Philadelphia is a great town. It's often been described as the biggest small town in America. And like any small town, there are two kinds of people in the town who are looked up to and admired by the fans, and that is athletes and television people. And it really is a great town for sports. And Pellegrini, he worked sports, let's see, what years? 71 to 76. Come on up here. Joe Pellegrino. Yeah.
I would have tried the old Johnny Carson trick by tripping up myself here, but I said I better not do that. I'm going to bring up a guest here in just a minute, just give you a little background on me. I was born in Washington, D.C., believe it or not, in Georgetown Hospital. What year? The year was none of your business. And it was too long ago to remember, as a matter of fact. But anyway, and I broke into broadcasting, and just to make it real quick, in radio, at WWDC Radio, which was the best news station in the city because they were basically the only ones who did it, but they did it right. And guess who was one of my news directors? Joe Phipps. Joe Phipps was a guy that smoked all the time, and every day that I saw him, he had cigarette ashes on his necktie. I mean, he was consistent. But anyway, he was a great news guy and a great writer. So that was that. And who came in 3 months after I got to D.C., WWDC, was Maury Povich. So it's a very small business, as you can imagine. Anyway, from there, I got in covering politics, Congress, and the White House. Very briefly, I worked my way into sports. And then Boston called, and I got my first sports director job there. And then I went to San Francisco because I figured I got to try the West Coast once, which is the biggest mistake of my life, because San Francisco is a terrible sports town. They're too busy being Californians, And also, they love to drive on the freeways, and they're hard people to get to know. There are a lot of nice people out there, but if you don't win, they don't show up. So, and at that time, nobody in San Francisco was winning. So I couldn't wait to get out of there. And luckily, Mel Campman called, because I had met him down through the business. And offered me a possible job. He was working on it. And I also got an offer from Pittsburgh. Now, Pittsburgh offered me a little more money, but I figured if I go to Pittsburgh, I can drive 200 miles in every direction, and I'm still no place. So I decided, I'm an Eastern guy. My brother worked on Wall Street in New York. My kids, and I was divorced at the time, who lived in the Washington, D.C. area in suburban Maryland. So I had family and a lot of other reasons just to go there, to Channel 6. And I'll tell you, it was the best deal of my life. Because when I walked into the newsroom for the first day, the first guy that walked right up to me and shook hands was the great late sports writer Stan Hochman, who was filling in for us temporarily for the guys that was going to eventually get the job, which was me. But after seeing the job that Stan did, I was wondering what the hell they hired me for. But anyway, luckily, I grew up loving sports. I was a scholarship athlete in college at American University, playing baseball and basketball. And I'll tell you, it was such a camaraderie that I felt in that newsroom when I first arrived, and all the people who have come up here have been basically the same thing. Jim Gardner touched on it, that it really was a team effort. I mean, I played a small role. They brought me in because I had a full head of hair. And one of the excuses they gave me was, well, we're a little shy on women watching our news, and maybe they'll watch you. So they put me out in a damn commercial out in Fairmount Park, where it starts off, you know, Joe Pellegrino likes to have some quiet time as he reflects, and they show me walking up a walkway in Fairmount Park. But he has this little problem. And then they look down this walkway, and all of a sudden you see these bobbing heads, and there are about 30 good-looking women come running up after me, and they chase me out into this big field, and that's where the thing went to fade. You know, it just faded out. And said, Joe is still working on his problem, you know, something. So anyway, it was quite an experience. But one of the great things that happened to me, they put me in the back of the newsroom in one corner. Over in the other corner was this beautiful young lady who was our graphic artist, Cheryl Cotton Nash. She was so good looking, I had to fight to keep from looking at her because I turned my typewriter the other way into the wall, so it kept me focused. So anyway, but we developed a great relationship because I had 2 daughters that I was raising, and she was very interested in my kids, and we had a lot of great conversations. And I brought some of her artwork that she did of me, and I want to show you some of this. So I've got to call up Cheryl. You come up and you'll see these for the first time. It's the first time I've seen her now in about 35 or 38 years, however many years it is, and she is still fabulous. So come on up, Cheryl.
I'm going to say, I have no idea what these look like. I haven't seen them. Oh,
Is that
my
you?
gosh.
You remember that one?
I think, yeah. Look at that head of hair.
Yeah. I think that was me. Anyway.
Wow.
Now that's one. Here's another one. It's called Channel 6's Top Meatball, Mangia, meaning eat in Italian. And what am I bid for this picture here? Anyway, no, I'm only kidding.
No, you can't sell that.
No,
You can't sell
I
that.
can't sell that. And let's see. Now here's one.
Complete with press type on there.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can put them down here. Now this was a picture of me getting ready to go to Florida for spring training. I got my Phillies hat on, and on my suitcase it says Florida. I'll tell you, is this girl talented or what? And also, here's a granddaddy. You remember the old Marriott that was right there on City Avenue? Well, they used to have dinner theater And I had the lead in Barefoot in the Park for 6 weeks in the summer. And we were on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights. Here I am in my normal outfit of polka dot pants and all sorts of stuff that she did. And it says a lot about her talents and the work that she did. Now, tell me what you're doing as a I mean, I know you did a bunch of projects that were interesting.
Well, I want to say that I had one of the most fun jobs in the news department. I was hired right out of art college, and in the absence of Mel Campman, he was on an extended vacation, and I had no idea what I was getting into. I was right out of college, looked like a lot of fun, and they offered me a little more money than I asked for, so I thought, I was flying high. So then the legendary Mel Campman came back from vacation, and by then I had heard many, many, many stories and was terrified. And he said, you know, your job is to do those graphics and get the people to be thinking about what that graphic is and then go back to the story and concentrate on the anchor. And I said, I understand that. So in essence, it was like glorified Pictionary. So you never want to play me in Pictionary. I can come up with any kind of quick picture that is needed. But I feel like I was one of the youngest in the news department. I worked from 72 to 84. And I feel like I was one of the youngest when I was hired. Was not married, did not have children, as did a number of the 20-year-olds by then had married and starting families. So if they needed a guinea pig, it was me. And I can remember Jim O'Brien was going to go out on a limb to create a weekend forecast for a holiday weekend at some point. And my job was to come up with the graphics that would allow him to go down to the studio in front of the blue, well, I forget what it's called even, the blue background, and position him out on a limb.
Chroma key.
Chroma key, of course, of course. I went with Mike Strug, and we, I remember interviewing Yellow Jackets. It must have been a very, very slow news day, but we bought fried chicken, you know, and I sort of helped develop some of those ideas. So it was, for me, it was just a fun, fun job, and I have such fond memories of being there. And every once in a while, I'll have a dream that I'm walking into. I dream a lot, but I'll have a dream that I walk into the news department, and I recognize the people, but I can't find my way around. And it's very funny that it was that, you know, all these years later, it's that vivid in my mind. And it was just a very, very special time. So I have nothing but fond memories.
Now,
and
you were the only artist in Philadelphia?
I think there were other artists. My job was to do courtroom sketches also, and
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you that.
yes, I did the courtroom sketches also because, of course, in those days nobody was allowed in. And I said, "Oh no, I really don't do those." And they said, "Oh, but you're going to." And I remember a trial with I think it was Hank Spurka. And it was the Marilyn Dobrolinsky trial. I mean, this is etched in my mind because these were the worst drawings I have ever seen in my life. And they said, "Now, what do you want your credit to how do you want your credit to read?" And I said, "Oh, no, you can't put my name under there." and that only inspired me. I mean, once I knew that was going to happen, it inspired me to really try to get better because it appeared that I was going to be doing those. So I did somehow get a little bit better, but fun years, and they served me well. People sitting at this table are dear family to me. I can remember Bob Feldman giving me great advice about how to manage having a child and working, and then when I finally left, it was to be with children, but I ended up starting another business, so, you know, it was like, gee, I long for the action news days. You know?
Don't we all?
Yeah.
How many kids have you got?
I have 2 children, 2 daughters, and they're terrific. During the course of them being home, well, this group will appreciate it. I decided I would put some of my graphics on T-shirts and sweatshirts. And that was going to be my business. I was going to do, Halley's Comet was 1976. And I had done this great graphic, and I thought, I'd left Action News, and I've got all these graphics in my head. I will have them silk screened and sell them, and this will be my business. I'll do it from home with my children. My husband said, what happens if it's like not a stellar event that they think there? What are you going to do? It's not coming back for 76 years. So that was actually the beginning of my doing graphics and doing a line of clothing, which I did until about 3 years ago. So I had I did, there was life after Action News, but not the fond memories that I do remember.
And to tell you how great this lady is, she's still married.
Well, I must say that I got a call from Joe, and I was so excited. And I hadn't talked to him for many, many years. Just
Over 30 now.
I know, and I had a secret crush on him too. But
Well, anyway, all I can say is you have made my year. Just to see you again, you're just a great lady. I got to tell one Larry Kane story. Cheryl Cotton Nash. Thank you. I'm sorry, that's Cheryl Cotton. As a matter of fact, there was a Cotton Nash basketball player who played in college. He was an All-American. Anyway, I got to tell this one Larry Kane story. About 2 weeks or 3 weeks after I got to Action News, Larry Kane, his car was I hate to say it, but it was a jalopy. And one day, Larry drives into the parking lot with a brand new car. And I say, because I was parking around the same time he came in, and I said, Larry, hey, you got a new car finally. He says, what happened? And he told the story on himself and kind of laughed. He said, well, to tell you the truth, what happened was yesterday, I pulled up at a stoplight, and this school bus pulled up right next to me. And all the kids in the bus looked in, and they recognized me, and they said, hey, Larry Kane, hey, they're jumping up and down, they're hooting and hollering and so forth. And this one smart kid hangs out, he says, hey, Larry, with all your money, what are you driving that old jalopy for? So they shamed him into buying a new car. So that's Larry Kane. Hey, thank you very much for the attention, and thank you for not throwing anything. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Cheryl, I think you're getting old. Halley's Comet was 86, not 76. It's every 76 years, but it last appeared in 1986. Well, maybe you were. Sure, you were still there in 86. No, the comet is every 76 years, but it last appeared in 86, I think. Anyway, when Jim was talking about fighting with his 11 o'clock producers, everybody who works in television, as many of you do or did, know that what you see on TV is a very small part of what really is going on. What really is going on is that somebody who's in charge, a producer, executive producers, etc., they're seeing to it that everything fits, that this story follows that story, and that everything is where it ought to be, and the video is there to support the stories, etc., etc. It's a very complicated business. What you see is only a small part of it. Well, when you watch the 11 o'clock news at night, the person who really runs the show is Rick Williams, who executive produces the 11 o'clock news with how many producers? One producer? One other producer. Anyhow, Rick Williams, good friend for many years, came to the station, I think 5 years after I did. In 82, I was there in 77. Yeah, come on up, say something.
Thank you. I know what you're all thinking. That doesn't look like Rick Williams at Action News. I've been there 35 years now, and for the last 30, I've been introducing myself as the other Rick Williams, because when I say I'm Rick Williams and I work at Channel 6, and people look at me like, nah, who are you trying to fool? But actually, I'm the original Rick Williams. He's the other Rick Williams, but he grew a mustache so people could tell us apart. But I did come to Channel 6 in the summer of 1982, and when I walked through the doors, I was immediately overwhelmed. It was August 23rd of 1982, and I came from Columbus, Ohio. It was a last place station in that market, and Al Gore hadn't invented the internet at that point, so I really didn't do a lot of research about Channel 6. one employee where I worked was from Philadelphia, and he said, "Oh yeah, Channel 6. Yeah, you should go to work there. That's a pretty good station." So my wife and I and our newborn daughter struck out for Philadelphia, and I've been here ever since. And 35 years out of the 70 that we're celebrating today, I still feel like a newbie listening to some of these stories, but it's just been great to see these folks that I worked with over the years and meet some new folks who were there before I was. But I want to tell you, it's just been such a great thing working at Channel 6. I was originally hired by then news director Alan Nesbitt and assistant news director Bob Feldman to do weekends. And Rob Jennings was the weekend anchor, and he and I worked together for 5.5 going on 6 years, 6 and 11 every Saturday and Sunday. And Rob was a consummate professional. I learned a lot from Rob because I'd only been in television a couple of years when I came here. I started out in radio, and Rob he tolerated me because every night I would try to stuff 20 pounds of news into a 5-pound sack, and we'd be rushed at the end of the show. Fortunately, back then, we didn't have a weekend weather person. Rob did the weather. So I would get in his ear on the IFB and I'd say, "Rob, can you do weather in 40 seconds instead of the usual minute and a half or 2? And he'd say, "Sure." So he would zip through the weather, and that was a bane of his existence. He would always complain about having to do weather, but it took until we hired Cecily Tynan for weekend weather. He finally had somebody with him, and he didn't have to do weather. But we had a great team. Rob Jennings and Gary Papa together. That was a great weekend team. And Gary, we sure miss him. Wish he was here. He was just, he would light up the room, and we miss him. But I've had the pleasure of working with many, many great professionals over the years. Mark Howard, Lisa Thomas-Laurie, Dave Roberts, and Jim Gardner is a consummate professional. I set my sights pretty high because I wanted to be Jim's producer. I wanted to do that 6 o'clock show, and it took me almost 6 years to get there, but I finally did. And Jim tolerated me for a while, and we had a few one-sided conversations where he did all the talking and I did all the listening, and he was right. I could never challenge something that he said. He was always right, and he was. And I just wanted to work with the best, so I had to be the best. He makes everybody around him better. And to this day, Jim's been doing the 6 and 11 for 40 years now. We celebrated that, marked it this summer, and I was tasked with putting together a 3.5, 4-minute special on Jim's career over the years. And Jerry was a big help because we had to go do some deep diving into some archive film and video to get some old Jim Gardner when he had the big dark mustache and lots of dark hair. And so he's been doing it for a long, long time, and I learned so much from him. We worked the 6 o'clock news for 13 years together. I figure that's about, given vacation time, that's probably about 3,000 newscasts together, and loved every one of them. Every day was a challenge. And now as an executive producer, my job is to oversee the 11 o'clock newscast plus the 10 o'clock newscast that we do for Channel 10. And 17, what did I say? Channel 17. Channel 10 used to do it, we do it now. But each night is a challenge, and we come in, and Jim touched on it earlier. It's just a great group of professionals. It's a team effort, and we always try to do it better than we did it the night before. And that's something that is one of the old guys on the staff now I try to impart to the new producers and the new reporters and the new photographers, is the action news way and doing it better than you did it the day before. I did mention Rob Jennings earlier, and he did send a note. We were going to try to do a phone call with him, but he and his wife Karen are driving through the mountains of North Carolina right now, and there's no cell reception apparently. So he was going to call in. We were going to have a little Q&A with him, but he did send a statement that he wanted me to read, at least in part, and he touched on the weather. He said, after a while, I could do the 5-day forecast in less than 30 seconds. If you only left me 10 seconds, I'd say 1 to 3 inches of snow, tune in at 11 for the 5-day forecast. And yeah, he would. And back then, weather didn't have the same value to the viewers, apparently, that it does today. Weather is very important today. And when there's a weather event coming, people tune in. And back then, it wasn't quite the same. But Rob was, he was so good, and from his radio days, he was a radio disc jockey in his earlier career, and he could do a rushed weather forecast and make it not seem rushed because he was just able to ad-lib, very conversational, and he was just a pleasure to work with. So I wish we could have got the phone call, but that's the way it goes. In 1997, on the 50th anniversary of Channel 6, I was tasked with putting together a special and going back through 50 years of archive stuff and coming up with about a 10-minute tape of 50 years of Channel 6. And it wasn't just Action News, but Channel 6. And people, you know, we've done parades and local events. Channel 6 has always been about local. And so the shows that we did, Captain Noah and Sally Starr and Chief Halftown, I'm kind of discovering all of these people that I'd heard about, and I'd met Captain Noah. He was still on the air. Of course, there was Al Albert's Showcase, and that would tape on the weekends when I was producing, and boy, the third floor hallway would be full of little kids and glitter and sequins, and it was quite an event. But to go back through, at that time, 50 years of Channel 6, what a remarkable television station. And it was a learning experience for me, one that I really cherished. It was a lot of work, but it was so interesting, and I really cherished that assignment. And it came together very well. It was co-hosted by Mark and Lisa. Jim Gardner emceed the event down at the Bellevue in the ballroom that night. I think Rosie O'Donnell was there, and yeah, it was a big soiree down there. But it's been a great 35 years for me. It really has. And so I try to impart to the new employees what it is about this television station that makes it special. And so many of the new hires come in and they say, "Oh, my parents watched you guys," and I would tell them, "Well, don't tell Jim Gardner that, you know. Just say, yeah, you were on in our house," but Jim doesn't want anybody to feel like he's too old. But he's just the dean, and it's been a pleasure to work with him. Been a pleasure to work at Channel 6. I still look forward to coming to work every day. I really do. There's always something new. Great group of professionals, from the engineers back in the day, Steve Sachs and Bill Russell and Al Maslin and Herb Kircher and all those guys, to the folks we have now, Mark Bress and everybody. And boy, the video editors, the assignment editors, all the people behind the scenes that make Action News happen. It is such a team effort, and it's just a great place to work. And I'm glad I'm still there, and frankly, I got to go to work right now. So I'm going to hand the microphone back to Mark Howard. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. This is the older Rick Williams. You are older than Rick, aren't you? Yeah, a couple of years. I used to watch Liz Matt on public television. Is that right? For years. I was a fan of yours long before you knew I existed. And then you finally sold out. You said, "I think I'll go to Channel 6 and I'll work with Wally Kennedy and do AM Philadelphia for so many years." In fact, as I recall, AM Philadelphia might have been the last program that Channel 6 preempted the network to keep AM Philadelphia on. And we owned the network, and finally somebody in New York said, "You can't do that anymore. You got to," so AM Philadelphia died, and I think Wally's on the radio, and here's Liz Matt.
Yes, thank you, Mark. The late Elizabeth Starr, I refer to myself. And I bring greetings from Wally. Many people have said what brought them to Philadelphia. My parents brought me to Philadelphia. I'm local. And Channel 6 is 70 years old. I'm going to be 66 in a few days. And so I think I can speak to about 66 of the years of Channel 6. So I'm going to buzz through as many as I can from the programming department, because we've spoken appropriately a lot about the news department. And Diego referenced public affairs, but the programming department is what was the heart of Channel 6 for a lot of us viewers. I started out with Romper Room. I moved on to Happy the Clown, watching the children walk in circles with the marching sticks. You would move from there to Wee Willie Weber, who had a cartoon show in the mornings, and he would bring in the weather on a kind of a puppet that was on yes, Elmo Wiffle Weather, because it was WFIL, and Elmo would bring in the weather in a little cup on this kind of thing that was with trapeze, essentially. And every day, Bill would teach us to save. He had a big cat bank, and you would hear the sound effect of putting a few pennies, and he said, "Children, you must feed the kitty," and a cat sound effect would play in the background. And even as a small child, I was aware of production value, because I thought that was a marvelous thing. As a Channel 6 kid growing up and a child of television in Philadelphia, you moved on from there, of course, to Sally Starr. She was our other mother every afternoon. On the weekends, you had Chief Halftown. And when Chief Halftown came to the Hamilton School Fair in Roslyn, where I was from, or when Sally came to the Kitty City in Roslyn, that was the biggest events possible, because they owned our hearts. I would then, as I grew up, became more aware of Bandstand. Now, Bandstand, when it was local, was really more my older sister's generation. But she and her classmates from Cardinal Doherty and Bishop McDevitt would get, somehow down to 46th and Market, and covered their school uniform insignia with a cardigan sweater, and they made the Peter Pan collar of the Catholic school uniform famous coast to coast on national television. Jump ahead, I was really of the Jerry Blavat generation, and there were a couple of girls from my class at St. Basil Academy up in Fox Chase who danced on Jerry's shows and kept white go-go boots in their lockers, and they took their uniforms off and were part of that generation of teenagers that were shown on television that made such an impact on us. We were aware that on the weekends, Larry Ferrari, our grandmothers all watched Larry Ferrari. Eventually, the Al Albert Showcase became a very important part of life in the Delaware Valley, with hundreds, as Rick said, hundreds of children, little girls with their stick-out skirts and little tiny boys with their miniature tuxedos. But Al's gift for finding talented children was really borne out over and over again, right through the most famous one, Jared Spector, who went on to, I think he had a Tony nomination on Broadway for the show Beautiful. So we were raised with every aspect of our lives could be informed by Channel 6. Long before I ever thought I would be hosting AM Philadelphia, there was Connie Rusin doing Dialing for Dollars, and then it became Jim O'Brien's show, and then it became Dave Roberts' show, and that morphed into AM Philadelphia with Dave Roberts and Claire Carter. And long before I ever thought I would sit on that couch, I was aware of them and watching them, and fascinated by the Daily Show that would do fashion and cooking demonstrations and things like that. By the time I joined AM Philadelphia, we were still doing that kind of a morning show. If somebody was at Valley Forge Music Fair, or by that point in Atlantic City, the limo would come up. We had the autograph seekers out in the parking lot. The people who used to go hang out by the Mike Douglas show, which by then was gone, had come on over to Channel 6 and were waiting in our parking lot to get their autographs. So we were interactive. We were always interactive, as everybody has said. I want to talk about three more things which I think are extremely important. We also did telethons. And every year that I worked there, except for when I was pregnant and had just given birth to my son, I worked on the Variety Club telethon, which was in the wintertime, and I worked on the MDA telethon, which was Labor Day. And you talk about touching people's hearts. People speak with great affection for coming in to our broadcast with their little pots of money, the children who raise money at backyard circuses for muscular dystrophy, or at the complete other extreme, the wonderful people of Variety Club who raised massive amounts of money in their formal gowns and their fabulous events. But in all cases, they were raising money that local families connected with their health, with something that was, it could not have been more personal. The health and the future of their fragile children. What a great privilege that was. And finally, we did the ethnic parades. Wally Kennedy and I co-hosted with Diego Castellanos for many years on the Puerto Rican parade. A week later, we would do the German parade. A week after that, we would do the Polish parade with Michael Blihash, a man who didn't even have any vowels in his name. I had to be taught how to pronounce Michael Blihash's name to work with him every year. When the Polish parade came by, we couldn't announce the names of any of the units. We would turn the page and say, "And Michael, who is this coming up the street? Boy, they look good in their red and white." You know, those were very, very important. But I want to end with one final thing, and I've been made aware to keep this short. Channel 6, this is very important for the history of the station. Channel 6 saved the Thanksgiving Day Parade. Philadelphia Thanksgiving Day Parade is the oldest Thanksgiving Day parade in America. And for anybody who happens not to be from here, Gimbel's closed in the summer. Channel 6 was covering the parade, not producing the parade. By covering the parade, they were able to bring in a bunch of ABC stars, and Wally and I would be out there in a key spot on the Parkway introducing them. But there came a point, and I wish I could tell you the year, 20 years ago, the Gimbels evaporated in the summer, and there was no parade there was no parade. How could you leave Philadelphia with no parade? So Channel 6 threw a huge amount of money, or enough to make a woman who was in retirement, who had produced the Macy's parade, Valerie Legauskas, come to Philadelphia out of retirement, and in 4 months, find bands, reconfigure the parade, because Santa Claus wasn't going to climb into Toyland at Gimbel's, but it needed a focal point. Turn the whole parade around from starting at the Parkway to ending on the Art Museum steps. And it was fabulous. It maintained a tradition that is still key to families in Philadelphia. I know I'm forgetting many, many things of the programming department, but as a Philadelphian who hasn't worked at the station since 1995, I'm a viewer. I have been a viewer again since 1995, the way I was from the time I was a little girl until I got there in '84. And my pride in knowing that I was part of the station that saved this important Philadelphia tradition, I could bust my buttons just thinking about that alone. I thank you for having me. And the AM Philadelphia stories are absolutely legion, and I would hope someday maybe we could talk about those, because we took a show that went from being fashion and demos and Dom DeLuise cooking to being all crime all the time and then all OJ every day. But that said, we were in living rooms for about 255 live broadcasts a year with new content every single day. And it was a pleasure and a privilege to be in those living rooms as I grew up with Channel 6 people in mind. Thank you so much.
A couple more speakers. We won't keep you too long. Steve Sachs is a cameraman at Channel 6, and he was there before I was there, and he's still there occasionally, like on the parade. They come on up, and now comes a truism. Wait. There's a little something I have to tell you about Steve. I married Susan Brooks in 1985, and I came back from our being away, whatever, honeymoon, And I sit down to do the news, and Steve walks over and says, you know, Susie's mother is my first cousin. And I said, Steve, if you had told me that, I never would have married into that family. I didn't know that. But anyhow, he's a good guy. He's still working. What year did you start?
I started January 61.
Oh, 61. Wow. Come on up here. Steve Sachs.
Got it. I had prepared a little thing to talk about, a little speech here, but with the hand mic and no teleprompter, I guess I'll have to wing it. So I started in January 61 in the business office. I had just gotten out of Fort Knox without any gold, and I was looking for a job. And a friend of mine, or a friend of the family, Zyke Levy, said, why don't you go over to WFIL and check it out. Maybe you can get a job there. So I spoke to Roger Klipp. I don't know if any of you remember Roger Klipp, but anyway, Roger Klipp hired me. Dave Bennett was there, John Scheuer, and a lot of the old original pioneers of true pioneers of television. So my first day there, I'm about 21, just got out of the Army, don't know anything. And I walk in, they said, sit down. I sit down at this beautiful brown desk. Oh, I had told Roger Klipp, I think, I don't know why I said it, anywhere but the business office. So anything but accounting. I'm terrible at math. So I get the call, you're starting in the business office. Anyway, I go in, I sit at this beautiful brown desk. They give me a book to read. It's the account manager's handbook. So now I think I'm the account manager in account receivables, and I'm a manager. I have no idea what I'm managing, but it sounds good. I'm going to be a boss. That's terrific. Well, I found out I'm in collecting bad debts for the station, all the deadbeats making phone calls. But there was also a plus side. I also delivered the paychecks. And one of the places I delivered the paychecks was to Dick Clark and Bandstand. And because they were all happy to see me every Friday they used to pay then, I became friendly with the crew there, Al Rosenthal, Tony Mammarella, and all the Bandstand people, Charlie O'Donnell. And it turned out to be a fun job because they were always happy to see me. They invited me down when Dick Clark was doing Steel Pier to go down to see the show at Steel Pier. And then we go across the way and at a big party in the motel across from Steel Pier. And there was Jerry Blavitt helping us with sandwiches and helping Dick do all sorts of things. But it was really a lot of fun. And Bandstand, I got to tell you, for a 21-year-old working at the station, was a lot of fun. Also, I had to deal with the billing, and we had key punch operators, and the person around it was an ex-combat Marine named Gene Vassell. And anyone that's ever been in the radio business, or anyone that was ever in the business in the 60s, will know who Gene Vassell is and the fun that he was. But he started out managing the key punch, I guess that's what you would call it, for the billing, and that would convert the air they would sign the logs, and then would go to the billing department. They would punch it up so I could send it out so people wouldn't pay their bills. And that was very interesting. Then I wound up, after that, I got transferred to the film department. That was division, that was Triangle Division, and I was the film censor. Oh, what a job that was going to be. Actually, it's nothing that you think it is. The censorship involved, we used to get a sheet from the National Legion of Decency. I don't know if you know what that is, but there was a sheet of all the films that came out, and it would tell you what you were allowed to see. I'm not sure who put it out. I think the church put it out, but I'm not sure who it was. But anyway, I never followed it, and I never got in trouble. But anyway, I did follow the NAB, and the NAB was, nudity. But the other ones that you really don't hear much about, stereotyping of people and cruelty to animals. If you notice, you've never seen a bullfight on TV. I don't think. You may have seen films and feature films and all that kind of thing, but you've never really seen a televised fight like you've seen a Phillies game. And the cruelty to animals, you've never seen a cockfight. As far as stereotyping of people, That's eased up a little bit, especially with Turner Movie Classics. But it's still a subject that you have to be aware of, and it's interesting when you get into it. Language was another one. But for your information, the movie that I had to censor the most was a movie called Looking for Mr. Goodbar. I don't know how many of you have seen it. I had 34 edits, audio edits, and I don't know, in the final scene, I don't know how many video edits. But it took me a week to do it. And probably the best argument against censorship, but also a good argument of why television, commercial television that goes into people's living rooms should be censored to a point. I mean, you're going into someone's living room, and you certainly don't want to be rude when you go in there. But Looking for Mr. Goodbar, it was a movie that, there were, by the way, I had 34 audio edits, there were 35. And I stayed up that night to watch the movie, and I picked up one of the words that I missed. The next day at 7 o'clock in the morning, I was in the station in Master Control, and I said, anybody call or anything? He says, we never heard it. No, why? Why are you here? I says, where's Looking for Mr. Goodbar? He says, it's over there on the shelf. I took it right down to my office, hit the button, and edited the 35th word. So it was clean, and they didn't have to worry about it anymore. And then I got the job on the crew. And I have to give a special thanks to Lou Klein, because he was my friend and mentor. He was my teacher at Temple, and just was great to work for. And everything happened then. I got to meet presidents. So many people in here. Dave Frankel, I remember many mornings in the morning. I remember having bets with Dave Frankel with the weather. He'd make a weather prediction and predict snow or something. I shouldn't tell this story, but I'd say, I'll bet you $10 that's going to be. You're hyping it. You're trying to get viewers. And he'd laugh, and he'd say, all right, you're on for the $10. Next thing, if he lost, he'd pay. But also, if I lost, I had to pay him. But I remember that, and him also trying to work a deal with trying to make. I won't go into the details, but trying to make Rick Williams laugh one time, and that couldn't go on the air. But what went on in those morning shows, doing auditions with Monica Malpass. We did her audition. She did it. Bill Russell and I knew that she was going to be on TV and make it. And Mark Howard, my cousin, what could I say? If people talk about the news, and today news people are criticized, but if you talk to any one of the news commentators at Channel 6, and I'm sure the other stations too, if you wanted to discuss politics with them and the reason something's said or the reason something done, they'll know why it was done. What's the reason? Who the person is that said it? What made it the way it is? Anyway, I just want to tell you, it was great working there, working with Linda Munich, working with all the people in here, and thank you very much.
Thank you, cousin. We'll be done in 10 minutes. True confession. I stole money from Channel 6. For the last 17 years I worked there, I hosted a program called Inside Story. That was stealing money. They actually paid me to have the most fun I ever had in my 54 years of broadcasting. Linda Munich was the executive producer of that program for most of those years. She's here now. She's one of the key people who kept the community affairs stuff working, and one of the reasons, like Diego, that we were able to keep the station, because so many community people felt that the station did such a good job.
Well, that's music to my ears. They've covered every base. Hi, Dory. I got to see a lot of Dory Lenz while I was working. I started at Channel 6, and I'm going to try to talk mostly about the station in 1983. I was prepared only because I spent 10 years at Channel 48, where it was that Wee Willie and his cartoons would outrank Channel 6 programming occasionally. So they did the news and they did local programs. So I got my feet wet there for 10 years. And I'm so glad Steve preceded me, because I started in the business office also, Steve, as the assistant business manager. But I got to go to school for broadcasting by volunteering to do programs in studio at Channel 48. And lo and behold, in 1983, who knew they were selling Channel 48? I didn't. And a friend of mine who was a studio technician kept putting this ad on my desk saying that they were looking for a producer host at Channel 6. And I would throw it out because I was happy where I was. I was working in television in Philadelphia. He put it on my desk. He said, "You call up and get this interview." So I listened to him, and I did. And the best decision of my life. Channel 6 remains unique, but back then, you've heard the programming side from Liz. We also had an additional 8 programs serving the community. We had Perspective Delaware, Perspective New Jersey, Perspective Pennsylvania, Youth Perspective. I saw a lot of Steve in those days. And in addition to that, we had a religious show. I want to say it was Changes, but my memory is going. And a show talking about various religious disciplines. Then we had Prime Time, and we had Visions. These are magazine shows on the weekend. And eventually we had a show called Fast Forward. And I think probably Channel 6 was the only place in the country where those programs came out of a public affairs department. So you had programming and you had public affairs. And I was exec producer eventually, before me, Mike Cassio was exec producer of 8 shows a week. And the studio never stopped. It was quite a juggling game to book your time in the studio at Channel 6. So it was a glorious 31 and a half, almost 32 years for me at Channel 6. And I've been retired now, counting the days, almost 3 years, 2 and 3/4 years. And I miss it, but it was time. And it's time for me to give this mic over to someone else.
Thank you, Linda. You take too little credit. Our final guest is Dave Frankel, a good friend of mine. And while he's walking up here, I'll tell you a brief story how Dave and I both left Channel 6 because we won a bet. Both of us at different times in our career were confronted with a management offer to stay, and we decided we thought we could do something better. And the person in charge said, "You can't do better than I'm going to offer you." And I said, and he said, "Want to bet?" And we found something else to do. We won the bet, but we lost the audience because we disappeared, sort of, from television. In any case, Dave Frankel did the weather in the morning, then went to Channel 3, and he's my buddy, and it's good to see you.
Thank you so much, buddy. I love him. I love so many of these people. So, quick update. I won't take a lot of time. First of all, I do have a question. How come you didn't take a picture of my hair? Well, I guess I understand. Yeah, okay. So, this is just such a great event, such a wonderful thing. I was at Channel 6. I was there as an investigative reporter. That's how I started. And then when Dave was unavailable one day, managers had to look around for who could fill in for him. Well, anchors, no, they're busy, they're working. Reporters, they're busy, they're working. Me? Yeah, I'm available. Sure, I'll fill in. And I did. I filled in one day. What we didn't know was he was going to retire shortly thereafter, move to another place. He did. So when Dave came back, they still needed a guy to now be the second guy, and that was me. Such a thrill, such an honor. I loved it. I had so much fun. I have to admit, I was so good at it. I was amazing. No, I was really amazing, and I still am. Like today, sunny and dry. And last week in Florida, sunny and dry. So my forecasts were excellent. They're still excellent. When I left Channel 6, when I left the business, I actually went and did what my dad and two of my brothers did. I became a lawyer. My dad did it at age 19. Yeah. I did it at age 49. It was 80 years after my dad became a lawyer that I became a lawyer, and I did. So for the past 10 years or so, I've been a lawyer. My friend and I opened our own firm. We represent kids. That's what we do. All kinds of kids, all kinds of problems, especially also kids with special needs. We represent them. It is so rewarding, it just feels so good. It feels like just the best thing to do, and I really do love the work in that firm. It is my second favorite job. Channel 6 is number one. It always was. It always will be. I would tell the people who are there now, stay there. And I would tell all the folks here who left like I did, and let's go back. God bless.
Dave, stay here, and if we could have everybody who spoke come up, they need a group shot. While they're coming up, I'll tell you a brief story. I'll correct Jim Gardner. Jim said people ask him why they've been number one for so long. He said he didn't know. I do know. I think the reason Channel 6 has been number one for all these decades is because people in Philadelphia view Channel 6 as part of the family. Now, that's a generalization, but I'll tell you when I became aware of that. It'll be 34 years ago, in a couple of weeks, that Jim O'Brien was killed in a parachute accident. And I must tell you,
I remember that.
yeah, like it was yesterday. And I remember for at least 6 months after Jim died, I'd be walking down the street and strangers would come up to me and take my hand and say, "I'm so sorry you lost your buddy, your family member, your friend." And I realized then people in Philadelphia viewed Channel 6 as family. And I think they are, and I think that's why all of us who ever worked there really feel like that's why we're here today, because we're part of a family. Thank you all for coming.